Hello once again, everyone, and as you may notice, this is not my usual format, but since we are now almost 3 months away from Yeehaw, I figured it would be good for me to showcase the scenarios that we will be going over. This first video is going to go over the guided scenarios, which are meant to introduce you to fighting in melee, etc., and generally going to be a little more hand-holdy, keep you to the lance. And then the second video, I'll go over more of the open scenarios. So why are we looking at Legos? It's because I needed a visual medium. This was most readily available, and I don't think there's anyone who plays with swords that doesn't also play with Legos. Anyway, so firstly, this is just a lance. So the lance is a anachronistic formation that I came up with to basically give everyone a role, get everyone used to fighting in conjunction with each other, and I can stack lances together, which is generally speaking what we're going to be doing for all of the guided scenarios, with a few notable exceptions. So just to go over it again in detail, this is your position 1, the most armored person. Generally they'll be armed with a spear or perhaps a shorter poleaxe. Over his shoulder is the position 2, who's going to be using an armor-killing polearm of some sort, poleaxe, halberd, what have you. Over his shoulder is the position 3, who is in this case is using a lance, but that's the idea, is it's a long spear, the longest spear in formation. And then behind is position 4, who has non-standardized equipment, can kind of carry whatever they want. And the idea behind this is that position 1 is the front rank, holds the line, clears the way, and generally just keeps the formation from advancing too far. Position 2 is meant to take the openings position 1 creates, killing the opposite position 1s, and also guarding the one. Position 3's job is to fill the gap as needed. For example, 2 and 3 can switch quite a bit depending upon who you're fighting, and also if position 1 falls, it is generally position 3 that's going to be best at filling that gap. And position 4 is really just kind of whoever's left. Position 4 can also be, you can stack these 5 deep, 6 deep, kind of however many people you have in the armor ratio. But position 4 may also swap out, not generally with position 2, but may swap weapons with position 3 if they need to, or also may carry other weapons. In this case, I gave him a spear and a shield just for sake of funsies. So that is the lance stack. Now, you will be organized if you have your own friends and you brought, everyone's coming, then you can just build your own lance, and we will go ahead and try to keep fellow schoolmates or lances that train together. However, you may have to get swapped out here and there. If you're coming as an individual, we're going to assign you to a lance based upon your armor level, based upon your experience level, whether or not you're qualified on using an armor-killing weapon, etc. But you will get a place. So now, let's see what our first scenario is. So our first scenario here, this is the guided ranks. And as you see, we've got 4 lances on each side, a commander, a banner carrier, and then the wizards at either end are representing the referees or the marshals. So the idea behind this is that this is representing a part of a larger battle. The lances stack together into what is known as a block, and for this particular scenario, you are imagining that the blocks just stretch on well into the horizon. So there's not going to be any flanking. So for example, this guy isn't going to just run over out here or step out to the side, and the block shouldn't rotate gradually or anything along those lines. This is set barrier that the referee is enforcing so that these two forces can combat each other and basically just grind each other down. Now, with a little more people around it, you see how the lances kind of stack on top of each other. Not pictured as the position 4, just for sake of reserving my minifigs, but this will probably be a 4 deep. However, just 3 deep is also totally fine, and depending upon who we have, we might play around with it. But the extra role that is shown here that we'll play around with more in the open scenarios, I'll come back to this, would be the commander and the banner carrier, so don't worry about them too much yet. Basically, all it's going to be is a stand-up fight till one side is victorious, or at least the majority is victorious, and then we'll reset and do it again. This is the introduction. Everyone shouldn't have too much difficulty getting used to this, so we won't spend a ton of time on it. In the next scenario, things get a little bit more complicated. So now we come to the big new one for this year. This is advancing under fire. So what's going to happen is that we're going to bring up our archer corps. This is obviously not to scale, but the distance between these markers, the flowers, and the archers will be about 15 yards. That is the minimum safe distance. We'll get back to that again in a second. But our archers will be set up in formation. Our assailants will be put farther back than this, and they will start to advance gradually toward that marker. Now, the idea behind this is there's nothing that these guys can do against the archers. There's not going to be a run up and fight. You're not going to charge them or anything along the lines. This is just to get you used to experiencing essentially getting shelled. The advance will be gradual and they'll move up. The referee would obviously not be here, but we'll have two referees here next to a marker. They'll probably be a little more distinct than a flower. When anyone touches that, gets to that level, the call for ceasefire will begin, the archers will cease shooting, and the scenario will be over. So, like I talked about in an archery video, it's really just to get you used to getting shot at, keeping in your formation, and just feeling what it's like to be under a rain of arrows. We'll see exactly how far we end up setting you back, but you will probably be under fire for about a minute, which with our current drill is about 10 arrows from each archer, so you'll get a decent amount of shelling. Now, once everyone has done that and is comfortable with that, we'll go ahead and put it into more of a fighty scenario. So the idea will be, we will stack the numbers slightly differently, but the way this will work is that one side will be advancing under fire till they hit the marker. The archers will then retire. They will switch out equipment and become the defending team's position 4 or 3 or what have you. The idea here being that this side will be larger, you'll take casualties from something you can't do anything about, and then you will have to fight, which should just be a lot of fun, especially because if you manage to push through and catch those archers, I guess you can get a little bit of revenge. But both sides will get the chance to do this, and not all the archers will be firing at once. We'll swap them out for sake of changing the ratio of fire and also making sure they don't get too exhausted, but that'll be what that scenario ends up being. So our next scenario will be the bridge, which is also where I've broken out some more figs here. The idea will be that we'll have barriers set up that is representing a bridge crossing. So we'll have markers extending from the edge of the bridge out, showing that there's no stepping around it. There's no fighting over it. There's no attacking over the corner. You go here, you're getting eaten by the celestial shark or alligator. And this also is where we'll change the order that people go into. We'll slightly break up the lances, as the bridge is really only big enough, and this one is actually pretty close to scale, only big enough for about 2 people to stand next to each other, maybe 3 at a time. And so what we'll do is we will have a scenario just like last year where we send in the more heavily armored people first, or we will send in the more lightly armored people first, and then we'll go from there. Now, each side will get the chance to be the defender of the bridge, in which case you see how the defender side gets to start halfway up the bridge versus the attackers must advance onto it from out at distance. This is just to add a little bit of more fairness as opposed to this miraculously even bridge crossing, but that one was pretty straightforward, pretty simple, so should be about the same as last year. Now this is where things get a little more exciting. This is the doorway. So after the bridge, we're going to go ahead and put up the facade of our doorway. And again, this doorway is actually kind of close to scale. It has some particular features that are important. So there will be the attacking side, obviously. The defender side will be a little smaller than this, of course, and they won't really be anyone standing out here. Most of them will be inside. But what's really important here is that the door is asymmetrical on the front and back. So this will be as narrow as possible, just outside of the door's frame. However, on this side, you can see that it is swelled, allowing for one extra defender on both sides to still have a say going into the doorway. And then, of course, we don't need to worry about anyone attacking around it, so this will just be where everyone else is. The biggest thing about the doorway is we may do one of 2 things. We may do it exactly the same as we did last year, in which case it'll be regular weapons, or one of the things we have talked about is doing bad war in the door. Bad war being whenever one is restricted to sidearms, alternatively weapons that are not terribly tall, so shorter spears, etc. are still allowed, hence why a lot of these guys are holding swords and shields. We will see how everyone is doing. We certainly can return back to it as part of one of the more open scenarios later if people really want to do so. But regardless, this is how the door scenario will go. There's no attacking over it, etc. It's just march up the door and try to push your way inside. It's a very exciting engagement and not something a lot of people get to do. So all of that is our guided scenarios. They all are, with the exception of the archery, they're all something that we ran last year to great effect. The idea behind these is meant to be, it's mostly you just getting used to fighting under a slightly new condition each time. In the ranks with your fellow person, nice and straightforward. Now you get used to being under fire, and then you deal with the consequences thereafter. You fight with small obstacles, then you fight with larger obstacles, and maybe we limit the weapons during one of those. So that's going to be basically the first half of all of the melee fights. And then next video, I will go ahead and start describing the more open scenarios. I gotta do some rearranging before I can do that. So stay tuned, and I will see you in the next video.